Hello folks, and welcome to another one of my videos. This video is about how I go about planning my European trips, and also I reflect on my 2024 Norwegian Odyssey. All the clips in this video have never been seen in any other video published from the trip. So before I begin, I'd like to start by giving a little explanation on the technique that I used to plan the trip. This is a planning resource which hopefully will be useful to new and experienced bikers who may be doing their first international trip. The focus for me, of course, is travel from the UK to Europe. I employ a technique called mind mapping, and is simply a brain dump onto paper. It's easy to use, and you can be used for any task it requires to have an element of planning, and you can really structure it to suit any individual. On screen you can see a little bit of paper, and this is what I used to plan this particular video. It's A5 size, so it doesn't have to be big. And you can see that I've broken it down into various elements with sub-elements underneath it. And as I've seen in the ticker tape, it's easy to use, and after a few efforts it all comes together. The main point being, of course, you've just got to do it. And you can use it for anything. Make it for pies or cakes or wherever. So before we do dive into the detail of this planning resource, I hope you're having a look at the videos, the video clips, and you can see the very different types of roads and areas that are rode in. There were all kinds. I've tried to mix it up, tried to stay away from motorways as much as I could, although I did have an element of that in this trip. But I like to take the back roads, the A roads as they're called in the UK. I've transferred my scribbles on paper onto a slide to make it easier to read, and I've put it down into 7 headings. So I've got plan, prep, travel documents, packing, security, currency, and the cost of the tour. So we'll have a look at each of those headings and we'll dive into them to see what they look like. Right, let's have a look at the planning section. As you can see there, I've got various subheadings. I've got destination, proposed date, length of trip, route at a high level, max at 250 miles per day. The motorway type of roads, A and B, which is referring to the UK type roads. Sat nav, which is points of interest, POI for the TomTom. The accommodation, and any specific country regulations. So for the tour in 2024, the destinations did cause me a bit of heartache. I couldn't decide whether I wanted to go back to Switzerland or whether I wanted to go up to Norway, and so I huffed and hay for a bit. But anyway, I ended up choosing Norway. The date that I went was the end of June, start of July, and the length of the trip ended up at 15 days. Those 15 days were primarily driven by the fact of when you can get ferries. I knew I wanted to be away for anything between 10 and 15 days, and depending on how the planning went, would result in the length of the trip, which ended up as 15 days. I worked out a high level because I decided on Norway, and I knew how many stops I would need, how many days to get up to the top of Denmark, etc. So I did that kind of planning, and I aimed to do a max of 250 miles per day, and I think I kind of stuck to that more or less. I do motorway riding on the A and B roads, which I've already said, referring to British type roads. Try and avoid the motorways at all costs, to be honest. And then set up the sat nav with points of interest on the TomTom, so I know the areas that I want to go to, the areas I want to visit, the areas I want to have a look at, and then I just navigate to those points. Accommodation. Right, so last year I said I'm going to pre-book all my accommodation, and what did I do this year? I just pre-booked my accommodation at the top of Denmark and within the Norway itself, because it was so difficult to get accommodation in Norway at a price that I could afford. So the accommodation I booked more or less on the day that I needed when I was on the European mainland, but for the rest of it in Norway I had booked pre-planned, and it worked out very well. Actually, it was a good one. And lastly, of course, is make sure you know the specific regulations for bikes in the countries that you're going to be riding through. Otherwise, you could end up getting caught out. And that was my initial high-level planning activity I did for the tour in 2024. And I've got to say that it all worked. I didn't seem to miss anything. There's nothing comes to mind post-ride that needs to be added into this section. So let's move on to the prep section. So these are the things that I did before I left. I made sure that I done. So I pre-booked the hotels. I've already mentioned that I pre-booked the top of Denmark and the Norwegian ones. Other than that, I just booked them on the day, and I've got to say that it all worked very well. I didn't have any problems this year, so I really enjoyed that. The ferries is an absolute must that you must pre-book. I got that sorted out. So the 2 sets of ferries were the Newcastle to Amsterdam and the one that Hirtshals to Kristiansand, and those were pre-booked and paid well before the travel dates. I made sure the bike was serviced. My Honda NT 1100 was still under warranty, so I got it serviced to make sure that if I had any problems, I would be well covered. The tyre check is really quite a straightforward thing. Just make sure you've got enough tread to stay legal till you get home. The toolkit I put together was a really simple thing, just cable ties, a few spanners, a couple of screwdrivers, that kind of thing. Make sure I got a puncture repair kit that I could fix any problems with the tyres, the tyre pump, some chain lube of course. The UK number plate sticker, you've got to make sure you have one of them on because that's a legal requirement driving in Europe now. The vignette if you're going to Switzerland, and make sure that they've got a mobile phone plan that includes Europe. I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Right, let's look on to the next part, which is travel documents. Now, arguably, some of this could be put under prep, but I wanted to keep documentation altogether. So we've got bike insurance, we've got travel insurance, we've got the UK Global Health Insurance Card, breakdown cover, passport, your V5C, which is the vehicle logbook, the driving licence, and the addresses of pre-booked hotels. So this is very UK specific of course, and bike insurance, most of the insurance I've ever seen includes a certain amount of time riding in Europe with no real mileage limitations. So just make sure you got your insurance or travelling on the bikes. Travel insurance, now this is something that I think a lot of people might miss. Don't buy travel insurance that you would normally buy for sitting around the pool or on a beach. You need to make sure it covers travel on a motorcycle. There are if people find out that you've taken out travel insurance and you're travelling by motorcycle, you may well not be covered. So there's very specific travel insurance for bikers. Make sure you cover that one off. You need to have your UK Global Health Insurance Card, which means that you're entitled to a similar level of free health cover in European countries. Make sure you got breakdown cover. There's nothing worse than breaking down in Europe and not having any of this stuff. It costs very little. Just make sure you have it as a safety net. Make sure your passport, of course, the V5C log, a vehicle logbook. I haven't needed it at all, but if you're requested by the law enforcement people, you need to prove ownership with the V5C. Make sure you've got a driving licence that's in date, and also the addresses of your pre-booked hotels, because you may not have internet cover at certain points in your travel depending on where you go. I put them in as POIs before I left, so that was all good. So that's your travel documents, most important. Packing is one of these areas that I really learnt quite a lot of lessons from last year, because I took far too much with me. It was too carter up the stairs. Oh, it was just a nightmare. So I learnt a lot of lessons in this year. It was almost perfect. So let's run through this packing list. Clothes. One thing to do is don't overpack. You always overestimate the amount of clothes that you need, and you come back with clothes that you don't wear. I know it's hard. I know you get to the point where you think I need to take them. So as an example, the boxers. Last year I took something like 15 pairs of boxers to cover the days. This year I took 8 and washed them so that I didn't need so much space. So don't overpack. Just make sure that you really do need them. The overnight bag for the ferry, right, so I made a real mess of this last year. I didn't really pack an overnight bag properly, but this year I had it all in one bag. I had it all ready to go. So when I parked the bike up, tied it down on the ferry, I opened the side case, pulled out the bag, had everything that I needed for an overnight stay on the boat, and took it up the stairs. What a difference. But that's experience for you. But make sure that you get that sorted out. One of the things that I made sure that I had this time was enough cameras to fully capture my tour and keep it for my memories. So I did have, I think, maybe 4 action cameras plus my DSLR, and I had various selection of the mounts, so quite a bit. But like I say, if you don't have the mounts or the right camera, then you're going to miss your memories. I took a tablet. I didn't take a laptop this year. I took a lot smaller tablet, and the tablet was there for one reason, and that was to be able to transfer. I used that to transfer the data from cameras onto an external hard drive, so that I started the day with an empty micro SD card in each of the cameras. Selection of USB cables. Had a portable power bank, always handy. And I also took a backup phone with a SIM card for Europe. It was a different network. That's what it was. It was a different network, UK based, different network with inclusive Euro. So that backup was very useful actually when it comes in, because sometimes you didn't get coverage on one phone, you got it on another. One of the essentials for me when I'm travelling is the ability to get a hot cup of something when I'm on the road, and some of the areas that I went in was quite remote, or there was situations where I couldn't really leave the motorcycle. So I took with me a small flask. It was about 1.5 cup size, a small travel kettle, which was invaluable because there were some nights that the accommodation didn't have tea making facilities within the room, and the small flask kept me going. Tea bags and some travel cups, and between them I was always well able to get a cup of tea, whether on the road or in the evening time in the hotel. The other essentials for me was during the day, so I can get something to eat rather than have to find somewhere like cafes or restaurants or takeaways or whatever, was to make sure that I had some protein bars. So I took protein bars with me. I took some snack bars, some breakfast bars, those kind of thing, and I had a couple of bottles of water, so I was well stashed for goods on the road and self-sufficient. Highly recommended, I would suggest, whilst you're out there in the unknown. The last remaining couple of items that I mention here is a high-vis vest, required in France if you break down, by the way. I think that's a requirement, and my much abused waterproofs, of course, because boy did I get a lot of rain. So that was more or less what I packed, and I managed to get it all on the bike and still have room. And I'll add that I don't think I was ever felt like I was short of anything. So the packing was pretty accurate, and lasted and served me well over the course of the 2-week trip. Security was something I took pretty seriously when I'm away. I didn't really want to have a bad day at the office by losing the bike or some of the kit on the bike, etc. So in terms of overnight and physical security, I took a disc lock with me, which was alarmed, which beeped if it was touched. I had a security chain, and I had a bike cover just to get out of sight. So if anyone was interested in it, they'll have to go and make an effort to have a look what kind of bike it was. I also parked it in safe locations overnight. So in 3 of the hotels, I had really secure parking. 2 of them were underground. The one in Bremen was underground parking. The one in Stavanger had underground parking. And the one in, I can't remember the name of it, but it was in Norway, had under-building parking out of sight, out of mind. So it was all pretty good. So I really make sure that I don't leave the bike in a situation where it could be attracting attention. And that went the same for the other places that I was at. So they were in positions where they were either next to the reception and people. It was manned all night, and I felt pretty safe with that. Another thing I do when I'm out on a tour is I don't really leave the bike out of sight. I always make sure that I've got it in sight, whether I'm going for a coffee or whether I'm stopping at a site or sound or whatever. That way I know the bike's safe, and I know I'm not going to have any problems with people doing the naughties on my motorcycle. And I'm glad to say that it all works, and it didn't feel like it spoilt any part of the journey whatsoever. Oh, one last thing I forgot to mention under security is that I had a tracker on the bike, so belt and braces all round, and thankfully I didn't need it. So, how did I get on in Europe with currency? So, I took two debit cards, one of which didn't attract any charges for international transactions, and another debit card. Now, you do need two because I went through Denmark, and the fuel stations there, which are all self-service and prepaid, none of them would accept my MasterCard, so I had to use my other card. So be warned, don't get caught out with one, because if you've got no petrol in your tank and you're there, they don't accept money, there's no people there serving, you're going to be stuck. I took a small amount of euros, not much. I think I only took 50 out, and I maybe had about 40 or 50 sitting in the cupboard from the last trip, so not a huge amount, hardly used it to be honest, and no other currency. In Norway, for instance, everyone accepts cards, so nice and simple, easy to manage. So, cost. How much did it cost? So, I did set a budget before I went away. I knew what kind of money I was going to spend. And that budget was split across ferries, fuel, accommodation, the food and drink, and tolls. There was a few other little bits and pieces, but I'll put them under miscellaneous. And we'll go through that, and let's see how much this little trip cost. Right, let's have a look at the cost of the ferries. So Newcastle to Amsterdam is £538. The initial price I was quoted was just over £700. I shopped around and got it for a good bit cheaper. Now that was a lot more expensive than last year, I think, including food. It was about £400, so quite bad. I think something that influenced it a lot was Scotland and England were playing in the Euro Championships, and that certainly had an impact. Denmark to Norway is £155 return, and I bought one that allowed me to, I paid an extra 20 quid for that, I think, to allow me to change it if need be. River Elbe was the river crossings, about 7 quid each way. Give me a total of about £707. It's worth noting that the Newcastle to Amsterdam ferry did not include any food. Last year I prepaid for food, but this year I'd eaten before I got on the boat. And here we have the cost of the fuel. The total was £327, more or less. And you can see where and when I bought fuel in the different countries. So Dundee, Newcastle, Germany, Denmark, Norway, Germany again, Netherlands, and back again in Newcastle. You'll see one of the outliers, that's Norway. It was £51.50. That was the one where I paid double than I should have done. What you also see there is the total at the end of it. So we did 3,609 kilometres, or 2,243 miles. I used about 170 litres, which was about 37 gallons, and I got about 60 miles to the gallon, or 21 kilometres to the litre. All very good. Accommodation was by far the most expensive item of the entire trip. You can see that I spent £985. Now, if I was able to camp, you could certainly cut that down, but you can see the different costs. So you can see Germany, Denmark, Norway. You can see where I stayed for 2 nights. On average, it's probably, I don't know, just below £100 a night. So I suppose that's not too bad. But by and far, the most expensive part of the trip. All of the hotels were of good quality. I've no doubt I could have got cheaper hotels, but it would have been feeling like roughing it. I do need, at my age, at the end of the day, to get a good bed and a nice shower, get cleaned up and refreshed, ready for the long haul the next day. So well worth it. Money well spent in my eyes. And here we are with food and drink. So you can see I've got a total there of £340, which is fairly accurate. I've taken them all from my credit card, my debit card statement, so it's fairly accurate, and I've picked them all out. Might have missed 1 or 2 out, but mostly that's the ballpark. So if you said £350 for food and drink while you're away, and I rarely drank any alcohol. I might have had a pint here and there. One of the pints I had when I was in Norway, a tin of beer, Carol's, were £10. Whoa. Anyway, I needed it that night, and it was you just had to suck it all up. I used the debit card 36 times through the 2 weeks that I was away. When you add all that up, it comes to £2,359. So you can see there the 700 and odd pounds for the ferry, 300 odd pounds for fuel, the £1,000 for accommodation, £340 for food and drink. Didn't incur any tolls. Tolls are free. The roads are free of tolls in Norway for motorcycles, which is just the business. One thing I haven't added there is my travel insurance, and there's probably a couple of other things that hasn't been in, but I got it from B-Moto, and I got it for £37, as compared to something like £15 if you just tell them you're going to a pool for 2 weeks. So there's the total cost. There may well be other things like the servicing and things like that, but I haven't added that in because that, strictly speaking, would have got done anyway. One thing I haven't mentioned was the budget that I set before I went. So when I started to plan this thing, I certainly didn't think it was going to come to any more than £3,000 UK, and thankfully it came in a lot cheaper. Not bad for a 2 week travelling trip in Europe. You can do it for a lot cheaper if you camp. That's a certainty. But you're going to get hit with the ferries and the fuel and the food. So they're pretty accurate figures. And with that, that's another fantastic European trip done and dusted. Loved my time. Norway was on a different level altogether. We've got some beautiful places in Scotland, but some of the sights in Norway certainly eclipse those that I'm used to here back home. Would it change anything about the tour this year? No, not really. Everything worked out the way I expected it to. I had a terrific time. One of the things you do when you're riding a motorbike is that you're never short of someone to talk to. Whether I met that guy 3 or 4 times, the Dutch lad coming down the road, or whether speaking to the Finnish guy, or all the other folk, the German lads that we were speaking to on the boat and all the rest of it, you're never short of a conversation. The hotel staff were very friendly, and English is certainly the international language, so when you go to certain countries, you're not going to be stuck. I'm already thinking about what I'm going to do in 2025. I'm hoping that I will get back to Europe in some shape or form. Still trying to work out what it is I want to do. I would love to go back to Norway. I'd also love to go down to Switzerland. Austria is a possibility. Possibly France as well. But we'll see. Certainly thinking about it and doing a little bit of planning and see what it is I want to do. So I hope you found this video was of some use. I've went into great detail about the various bits. Hopefully it can be a useful planning aid to those who perhaps have not done it before. And the costs are accurate for 2024. And with that, I'd just like to thank you for watching. Thank you for liking, commenting and subscribing. It's all very much appreciated. Until the next time, have a nice one. Bye for now.